Welcome into Bucs Insider, coming to you from the Bucs studio, presented by Ticketmaster. Casey Phillips here with Scott Smith and Bree Dix. I don't know if I remember a time that more has happened in the week leading up to this show.
Yeah.
We've all been through it, and then we had one of the wildest games that I can remember watching, not just from a Bucs standpoint, but a football standpoint. That was insane. So much to talk about.
We haven't done this in a couple weeks, and we decided we weren't going to come back until the Bucs survived a hurricane and had the most yards they've ever had in a game.
Yeah, we wanted to make sure there was enough for us to talk about here, and we have it. So, of course, we got to start with the run game, right? I mean, this was just such a massive part of this game, and even, a massive part of what they'd wanted to do this whole year, and it was such a point of emphasis these last couple of years. So, Bree, tell me what stands out to you now about this absolute explosion of the ground game.
Well, the Bucs finished with the third most rushing yards in a single game in team history with 277. So I think that's pretty telling. But with Rachaad White out dealing with foot injury, both Bucky Irving, Sean Tucker really stepped up. And I think you could see they were disciplined in their footwork. They accelerated quickly through holes. Sean Tucker was named the NFC Offensive Player of the Week. I'm sure he probably sent out the little please tweet. But I think you just saw his ability, that slash style, and then how they complement each other. And then Bucky Irving with the lateral cuts, the lethal stiff arm, kind of all those things to get the crowd riled up. And then there was a lot of gap runs. And I think one of the staples of that is the counter that's been really successful. And one of my personal favorites, I think both of you can probably say the same, is Bucky Irving's 31-yard zigzag run that came off of a counter. Both K. Dotton and Cody Mack pulled across the formation. And then Bucky was patient, letting Cade get the backside block, and then Chris Godwin also opened things up, getting the crack block on the edge. And then Bucky just made a move on the outside, cut back inside, and then flowed laterally across to move away from the congestion. And I think what you're seeing is just the cohesion, everybody being on the same page between the rushers, the offensive line, and then even the receivers and the tight ends in the blocking.
Right as you were saying, gap run, the replay that was showing was a Sean Tucker run, the 31-yard run, I think it was, to the right. And it was exactly that. And a great Tristan Wirfs pulling block. But I think the guy you didn't mention that's so important in the blocking scheme was Baker Mayfield.
Yeah.
Throwing that big
Throwing his body.
Right after he was
That
hurt,
was
too.
literally the first play.
The first play, he was
on
like
offense.
Full send going, which of course all of us
Ridiculous.
were like, no.
I was joking about that, but another important player in the blocking scheme is Chris Godwin. And Coach Bowles said it just the other day that Chris is as important to the run game as he is to the pass game, which is kind of ridiculous considering he's like, I think, first in the league in receptions and tied for first in touchdowns. So if he's just as important to the pass game, that's saying a lot. And then also when you talk, the run game, also when you talk about Chris Godwin, all of the little short passes in which he gains more yards is almost like an extension of the run game.
Right.
And last week in that game against New Orleans, he had 105 yards after the catch of his 125 yards.
So only 20 yards were through the air. Yeah.
Well, the touchdown was 55.5 yards of yak because he caught it a half yard behind the line of scrimmage. And we all, look at the route tree there. Those were mostly short passes, and that he was taking to the house on the one. So, yeah, Chris is important to this offense in so many ways.
Yeah.
I remember last year when he came on the show that I did with Allie Marpet last year, and we found out that he grew up playing offensive line in Pee Wee football.
You love to bring that one up.
I love it because I feel like it just makes so much sense.
Yeah.
It's like, yes, because I feel like everyone had described him as a guy that seemed to have the mentality of an offensive lineman, of this like, I'm not super flashy, I'm just here to I'm going to do the dirty work, I'm here to get done whatever's asked of me. I'm involved in the blocking game. That it was like, I felt like I saw especially like Allie's reaction to that of like, this all makes sense now, which I thought was really great. All right, so now we talked about that part, but man, we got to give the defense some props as well. And we saw, some important pieces come back, which was very exciting. So for you, Scott, what stands out about the defensive performance in this game?
Well, this isn't really the topic I was going to start with, but I was just rewatching the game yesterday, and it was clear in the second half against Spencer Rattler, who did some really nice things in the first half, that Todd Bowles said, nah. We're not going to have this anymore. And they set the edges and then just threw every kind of blitz and simulated pressure known to man. And Spencer Rattler, they didn't score in the second half, and 4 of the 5 sacks that the Bucs got came in the second half. And that's 5 sacks in that game, 15 over the last 3 games, which leads the NFL in that span. This is after it seemed like it was going to be a problem because the Bucs only had 2 sacks in the first 3 games combined, and not a lot of pressure overall. But I think what has been key is Vita missed some time, Vita Vea missed some time, came back, and now Kalijah Kancey just made his debut after missing the first 5 games. And those 2 guys in the middle are what we were talking about before this season started. Kalijah in his 2nd season, Vita after sort of getting into peak form, peak Vita Vea form, back to that in the offseason, that this duo in the middle was going to really drive a good pass rush. And I think we saw that in New Orleans. I mean, 10 different guys have been involved in getting our 17 sacks, and nobody has more than 3. But a lot of people are involved, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that those 2 guys in the middle demand so much attention. And you saw it. Kalijah made an instant impact, and everybody saw it. You could see it just watching the game, but also coaches talked about it afterward. He got a sack in his first game back. Vita got a sack for the 3rd straight game, and his impact on everybody else was pretty clear.
And there's such a ripple effect, right? Of you get Vita back, and that helps your secondary because he's bringing some stuff right in the guy's face, and the same thing, even Kalijah back helps Vita, and then having Antoine and Jordan are back there helping this. It just was so cool to see all the ways that having these pieces back wasn't just about their play, but it was how it elevated everyone else around them. And Zion McCollum came on the show with us this week, and he talked about how having Vita back, having Kalijah back, that he could just sense how different it was even for them as corners of it's so great to have all of these guys back because then that's even less that we're having to do. Right. There's less time I'm having to cover. There's the guy isn't as comfortable sitting back there. But I did want to highlight, our corners, man, what a game when you're asked, you see an undrafted rookie has not really had a chance to do much, and then thrown into
the fire.
In terms of Tyreek Thunderberg, that thrown into the fire, and yes, gave up that one touchdown. Coach Bowles said his eyes weren't where they needed to be, but he said outside of that had a great game, and I think that's a great sign for us that it's hard to have a backup corner come in. They typically are targeting you like crazy, going after you, and to come in for Jamel like that and handle it great was a great
First
sign.
time he ever played.
Yeah, that was it.
Defense.
Yeah, this was his debut. And then of course Tyke Smith. This guy has been such a rock, so solid, and Coach Bowles said on our show this week that. He gets the least rookie treatment out of all of them. I mean, he called it the most veteran treatment because he makes the least mental errors. That in terms of as a rookie, this guy has just had the IQ down to pat. And Todd Bowles' defense is not easy to learn.
That's correct.
Not easy to learn, and especially at that position, what you're being asked to do. And so I feel like to see what he did with these forced fumbles, which in my opinion, maybe there should have been 2 of them.
I agree. That one was a forced fumble.
I'm telling you, I don't know if we're allowed to get fined for saying these things, but if we are, we don't mean it. We don't mean it.
Just kidding.
We're kidding around. But should have maybe had 2 forced fumbles, got the interception. He's doing everything everywhere. And again, not making those mental errors that you would expect of a rookie. And I think that's great. And then Zion, his confidence level just seems through the roof this season. And I loved seeing that even though there were a couple things late in the Atlanta game that I'm sure he'd love to have back, it didn't affect his aggressiveness this week. He's leading the league in passes defensed, had his first 2 career interceptions in recent weeks. And I think that he's only going to be better with Antoine and Jordan back there too, because Zion also this week on the show mentioned how with having Antoine back, they had this level of communication where it's like, hey, because you're back here, I'm going to be able to play under some of these routes. That they have a very specific, you do this, I do this kind of a thing that he said wasn't the case when Antoine wasn't back there, that is affecting the way that, and he was basically kind of almost crediting that for the interception that I know I can do these things. And even just for him to have the confidence to now be playing those little games with this guy, like, hey, you do this, I can do this. We talked about how as a rookie and when you're early on, you don't feel like you can do anything other than exactly the game plan. And Levante's mentioned this too, of where when you're early on, you can't do anything but the exact game plan. But now the longer you're in it, the more confident you get. You can be like, hey, actually on this, why don't you do this and I do this? And Zion's at a position to start making some of those calls now, which I thought was really exciting.
Ronnie Barber and Derek Brooks used to talk about that.
Yeah.
That after a while, they were so
ingrained
in the defense that they would talk to each other and go, okay, we always do this with you on this side and you on this side, but let's switch this time.
Yeah.
And Derek and Ronnie love to tell that story.
I love that. All right, so also, as we talked about the importance of how many guys we were able to get back this last week, it's a very big deal. So again, because of the weird, not having the Monday night schedule, we're a day late on everything. So normally in the show we have an injury report by now. We do not. But so tell us what we're keeping an eye on once we do start seeing those injury reports come out of who's good to go, who may not be.
Well, Jamel Dean exited the Saints game early on with a hamstring injury. he will seemingly miss some time with the Bucs activating Keenan Isaac from the practice squad to the active roster. So his condition is certainly something that we'll monitor. And then Graham Barton, who's been dealing with the hamstring injury, didn't play against the Saints. Now, Robert Hainsey had an incredible game, boosted the run game. So if he's not able to go, then Robert Hainsey would obviously step in. And then Mike Evans was kind of in and out of the Saints game, so we'll get some clarity on that injury as well this week. And then also seeing how Trey Palmer progresses in concussion protocol.
All right, so then now let's get into our trivia for this week. Bree, what do you have for us here?
Okay, ready for this?
I am.
When the Buccaneers beat the Ravens for the first win in the 2002 Super Bowl season, who had the pick six that sealed the 25-0 shutout?
I don't know.
You have to wait for the answer.
I know. I'm thinking. I was wondering if I was going to get a hint. I feel like sometimes you give me a hint, and then usually the hint makes me think I'm wrong.
He was on the 2002 team.
Thank you.
He played defense.
Thank you.
If
that had changed my mind of who I was picking, that would have been really bad. If I was like, dang it, I didn't think about those things.
It was at the very end, and they were Baltimore was close to scoring, and it didn't matter. We were going to win the game, but the team really wanted a shutout.
I like it. Okay, that's going to be interesting. All right, so Scott, tell me a milestone tracker for this week. What are we going to be watching at this Monday night game?
Okay. We've been off the air for a few weeks now, so please forgive me for going back to the same well, but it's really important. It's Mike Evans. Since we last broadcast the show, he's got a couple more touchdowns, and so he's at 99 now. And that's tied for 11th with a guy from the Packers from the 30s and 40s named Don Hudson. And it's tied for 11th. So one more will give him 100, and that will make him the 11th player in the history of the NFL with 100 receiving touchdowns. And the other 10, 8 of them are already in the Hall of Fame, and the 2 that aren't are Antonio Gates, who was just eligible for the first time last year and is going to get in, and Larry Fitzgerald, who's probably going to get in on the first ballot when he's eligible. So we've kind of put to bed whether Mike Evans is a Hall of Famer or not. But that 100 touchdown is going to be huge. He actually has 100 total touchdowns because he had one on a fumble recovery, and he's tied for 24th in league history in that. But that's not as cool sounding as like top 10, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's funny. You're going to be tracking that milestone. I'm going to be tracking if he keeps the football. Because Mike Evans
he has a history.
Famous for throwing the football into the stands and then later being like, dang it. Should have maybe kept that one.
He's going to be halfway through. Oh, yeah.
Throw, his own, whatever. And so it was funny last week, you mentioned he got the 100th touchdown or 2 weeks ago. And threw it, and everybody's like, no. And there's like, well, it was 99th receiving. It was his 100th total. So everyone's like, okay, well, now this next one, he's going to keep it, right? And so I think that's what I will be tracking is if he scores, does he throw the football, and then does he regret
that?
How
teams have a get-back coach on the sidelines? We need a don't-throw coach on each end zone.
Put the net up behind the field goal thing, wherever he is, to keep it from going in the stands. Move the net in front of him.
By the way, his next game will be his 161st, which will break a tie with a great former center named Tony Mayberry for 8th place in team history. And it's weird to think that 3 of the top 10 most games played are on the team right now.
Yeah, that's
Levante
incredible.
David, Will Golston, and Mike Evans. And yet, the Buccaneers are something like the 3rd youngest team in the league.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a weird mix.
That's interesting. All right, so now let's flip into our fantasy watch.
Ooh,
which
that's my favorite.
That is your favorite for sure. So tell me, what are you going to be watching? What advice do you have for people?
Well, everybody's going to be deciding whether or not they should add Sean Tucker. And, because really, honestly, he had 53 yards from scrimmage in his career before this last game when he had 192. Right. And Rachaad White's going to come back at some point, and there's been talk of the 3-headed monster, and that's what every fantasy player dreads is a backfield where you don't know what's going to happen and which guy's going to have the yards and the touchdowns this week, next week, the week after. But in fantasy football, you got to take the shot at a running back because they're so hard to find, especially in season, and you've got injuries and you've got bye weeks and you need some depth. Take the shot, put him on your bench, see what happens. So I would say if you're deciding whether or not to pick up Sean Tucker, definitely do so.
Yes.
And then secondly, if you're a person like I do a lot, you stream defenses, like you pick a different one each week just based on matchups, stay well clear of this ball game on Monday night because these are 2 of the 4 highest scoring teams in the league. Bucs just had 594 yards. I think the Ravens had about 460 yards against the Commanders, and they averaged more than 200 yards a game, so rushing yards a game. So just don't bother with this game.
That's a good call. I like that very much. All right, so now this is where typically we talk about sort of the human interest side, off the field. Typically it's about a player, that we find some fun fact about them or interesting storyline. But of course, with this last week with the hurricane coming through and the Herculean efforts of our travel staff and everything they did for this organization, we just felt like that was what we needed to focus on, talk about just what it took to have this happen. So Bree, you were part of the travel party to New Orleans. Tell us what stood out to you about it and just what it was like to watch what all it took for that department to get this done.
Well, and it's funny because I think a lot of times in this industry, we get so, you have your regimented schedule, and unless you have a Monday night football game, a Thursday night football game, every week essentially mirrors the week before. Like, you know exactly what you're doing every single day. So this took flexibility, adjustments by everybody, and just obviously gratitude for the Glazer family for prioritizing the safety of the team, the staff, getting everybody out. And I just think, you just got to see the behind the scenes look of every single aspect, people making makeshift desks, people working in the meal room, people working on the floor, working in hotel rooms, because practicing at Tulane University, and then we're shifting multiple hotels. We're doing meetings in one hotel, we're staying in one, then we're all getting on the buses again, shifting hotels on Friday. But just to see, and I think throughout the week, initially you're worried about loved ones, obviously you're worried about the city of Tampa, because a lot of people had their pets, their spouse, girlfriend, whatever, on the trip. If you had a lot of people that all of their family wasn't on the team planes and wasn't able to evacuate, so you had them back at home. And then just absolute props to Tim Jarocki, the senior director of team operations, that I don't think probably slept at all. I think every single time I saw him, he was on the phone, coffee in hand, but just not only booking multiple options going into the trip and kind of having that contingency plan of, is it New Orleans, is it somewhere else, but then also after the fact of booking places for people that still had flooding, that still had issues in their homes that they couldn't go back to if we couldn't get back to Tampa. So all of that throughout the week, and just the ability of the team and the staff to just block out those distractions but use it as fuel against the Saints. And then also kind of the same with Duke Preston and Tyler Thompson with player engagement and just working with the players individually to see, okay, what is the home situation like? Do you have flooding? Do you need somewhere to go? And then booking, getting the hotel rooms ready. So it was definitely a team effort, a very, very interesting week, but happy to say that we got the win, and I think it was fun just to see the video of the game balls.
Tim Jarocki got one. Didn't Duke and his people also set up like excursions for the families?
Yes, so they had a big zoo day, one of the days for the kids.
That's really sweet.
Yes.
And the point, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
The point being, giving them something to do, and so the players, the whole idea was to be so structured and organized that the players could really focus on football like they normally do, and they're worried, right? And bringing their families along allowed them not to worry about their families back home. So it's not a heartless thing, like focus on football. It's like, let's take care of everything so these guys feel comfortable focusing on football.
Well, and I loved what Zion McCollum said too, is that if you had a question or going through film study and you're doing different things, he's like, we didn't have to send a text, you didn't have to call somebody. I could literally just walk down to someone's room and go in there and talk about things. You were in this own little world, locked in a hotel space. And even though it's different and it's out of your realm of what you're normally doing, I think the guys were really, really good about being focused and being locked in despite everything else throughout the week.
Yeah, I really think that you can't overstate the idea that part of why we won is because of the efforts of the travel department and the Glazer family, because the mental side is such a huge part of it.
Right.
And if you are frantic and worried and running around and all of that, the odds of you really, like you said, being able to focus on the game. So there's the side of the empathetic human side where this organization and the Glazer family took care of everybody, that it wasn't just about football. It was your safety is first, your family is first. Like, they don't have to do that. That was above and beyond for how the travel department handled it, how the Glazer family handled it. All of it was above and beyond. And then also to see how well they did it, that it affected the way that the team was able to focus and be ready for a game, to see that they hit both sides of that, of the human side and the football side so well, was amazing to see. And I just think that was truly a heartwarming thing of, football is family, that they always say that. And it was very cool to see that. And it wasn't just the football side either, that they were taking care of the business side, that they were telling everyone on the business side, hey, like, if you need hotels, the Glazer family has paid for them, these different places. And I thought that was so incredibly, again, above and beyond and amazing, and to feel cared for by your organization during such a stressful, chaotic time, I thought was really amazing. It made me proud to work here for the way that they handled it, and I thought that was really amazing.
And it continued on after the team.
Yeah, there are still people that they have in hotels because they don't have power, or they're flooded, or whatever the case may be. It was not a thing that, like to your point, that ended with the New Orleans game. It is still ongoing. So
the Glazer family provided the resources, but you mentioned Tim Jarocki.
Yep, and Zach Orth, we should give him
Joe made it happen.
Yes.
And they started this on Friday before the Tuesday trip. Tim was helping coach his son play football when he got the call. So on a Friday, just a normal Friday, a high school football night, right?
Yep.
And so I don't think he slept a whole lot, as you mentioned, after that. But they also they had contingency plans. They also found rooms in Houston in case there wasn't going to be a possibility.
As if planning one of these wasn't crazy enough. Let's do two.
Yeah, and there wasn't enough rooms at the JW where we were going to stay over the weekend, and did stay over the weekend, right? So they had to move to this hotel, and then this hotel had the meeting space, and so just to put it all together is pretty amazing.
It's incredible.
Good job, guys.
All right, well now let's turn the page, as much as this was an incredible week, and let's look ahead to this next game against the Baltimore Ravens. There is a lot to look at with this team. They are pretty dang good. They are lighting the league on fire, especially on offense. So tell me what stands out to you, of course, to start this one.
They lost their first two games kind of fluky, especially the Raiders game, but they've won 4 in a row coming in, and pretty handily, and against some good competition. And what stands out, first of all, is the running game. They're averaging 205 rushing yards per game, which in the offseason they thought, hey, let's sign Derrick Henry, the enormous running back from the Tennessee Titans, and put him in the backfield with Lamar Jackson. Look at the two of them next to each other.
Outrageous.
Lamar Jackson, who is such a rushing threat on his own, and let's see what this pair of running threats can do to defenses. And you got to say it's proof of concept. It's been exactly what they were hoping for, because especially think about a read. Yeah, no. He's
outrunning DBs with the football in his hand, and he's like twice their size.
Which he's done throughout his career, but he's 30 years old.
Yeah.
He's already reached over 21 miles per hour several times this season. He's running as fast as, when he gets in the open field, he runs as fast as anybody in the league. And he's huge, and he's 30 years old, so it's really not fair. But you saw, I think you saw in one of those plays there it was a what you'd call a zone read. So Lamar Jackson's either going to give it to Derrick or keep it.
How do you defend that?
That is rough for a defense.
I remember the first time we saw Derrick Henry, like we went to the joint practices in Tennessee, and he walked past us, and I remember you and I just being like,
she's not exaggerating, it's true, and we talk about this a lot, but we both were like, we knew he was huge, and he walked by and like, that's a running back?
We said, we're like, that's a defensive end. That's not a running back, that's a defensive end.
The most amazing stat, and you're going to talk a little bit about their defense, but the most amazing stat to me, right now through 6 weeks, the Ravens are outrushing their opponents by an average of 146 yards a game. They are averaging 146 more rushing yards per game.
If you were just averaging that many rushing yards, that's great. And then more
than the opponent.
Yeah, that's wild.
So hopefully the Bucs running game can change that a little bit.
Yes. All right, so Bree, what are you taking a look at for this game?
Yes, well, on the defensive side, Zach Orr was promoted to defensive coordinator. And I think it's interesting, a little bit lopsided. They are first in the NFL in run defense and 31st in pass defense.
So maybe we should throw the ball.
So while they have, you're telling
I'm going to go to Liam Cohen's offense after this and be like, I got it.
I got an idea. This came to me.
Just a whiteboard thought.
Light bulb.
Yeah.
Yes. So as much as they've struggled against the pass, they're forcing teams to be one-dimensional. I think that all starts with Travis Jones, their nose tackle, who plays with good leverage at the point of attack, has kind of been their anchor inside. And then their defensive tackle, and I really hope I do not butcher this, Nnamdi Madubuike. Yes, Madubuike.
Yep.
Again, who just has the short area quickness, the athleticism to stop rushers. And then linebacker Roquan Smith, who leads their team in tackles, and is just kind of a speed demon, can outpace rushers to the boundary, explosive in space. So I think those guys are going to be kind of the key of that defense and have kind of been their game wreckers each week.
By the way, Matabike had 13 sacks last year.
Outrageous.
Which is why he got his bag in the offseason.
I figured I would talk about the fact that, like, we went into the whole run part of their offense, and that alone would probably put
they don't have anything else.
Yeah,
right?
they put all their resources into just that. Yeah, so that was what I wanted to focus on, is the fact that that's not it, that's not all. That would be enough, but it's not. So they also have, of course, their offense as a whole, it's insane, their stats. First in the league in yards per game, yards per play, running yards per game, running yards per play, and sack rate, and third down conversion. All of those categories first in the league.
Yeah, but they're only like 8th in passing yards, right?
Right. So then there's that weakness. And then as we talk about, let's say, okay, we stop the run. Let's say we just.
Oh, okay, cool.
I'm going to just say that we're going to do that. They have Zay Flowers out there, and he's set new career highs in yards the last 2 weeks in a row. He had 9 catches for 132 yards in the first half versus the Commanders last week, and the week before he had 7 catches and 111 yards. So he can go off, obviously, if you don't pay attention to him, if you get too focused on Derrick Henry. Of course, Mark Andrews had been in a bit of a slump for him for a while. Right. Caught his first touchdown of the season last week, had a couple solid games now in a row, so you really don't want to let him get on that roll, start letting him and them get back into that same rhythm that they've had. And then the interesting thing is the one potential weakness it seemed like their offense was going to have this year was their offensive line. That they made some moves, they did some different things. New guys, first couple games, it was looking a little rough. It was like, oh man, like you need that offensive line to do what you want to do with Derrick Henry and with the passing game. And then they seem like they have figured it out. And we know how it is with the offensive line, sometimes it takes that chemistry, that communication a little while, and it feels like they are, because now they had 3 new starters coming into the season, and then they had some moves due to injury, and it seems like it's actually gone really well. They've now allowed the least sacks in the league. So again, number 1 in the league, they've allowed the least sacks across the whole season. So even factoring in those couple games that they weren't playing as well. So obviously this is going to be a tall task for our defense, but we've seen that, like, Todd Bowles can figure things out. That man is back there dialing up different things, and I feel like we've seen what a nice time to have so many of our defensive guys back, that I want to see, when I read all this, I'm like, but we have Vita, but we have Antoine, but we have all these things. And I'm just so thankful that for the timing of all of it, that we have a lot of our guys back.
Yeah.
It's going to be an interesting thing.
They're starting a rookie at right tackle in Roger Rosengarten. He's a second-round pick, but this last draft was so deep in tackles that you could find a guy in the second round. So, and also you didn't even mention Isaiah Likely, a second tight end, who is a very dangerous threat as well. So there's a lot going on there.
There is.
To figure out.
All right, so now it is time for our answer to our trivia question. Bree.
Do you want me to do?
Oh, I thought I usually answered.
Go ahead, by all means.
Well, I don't need to put on my glasses because I know who it is. It's. Do you have a guess?
Well, I mean, I always guess Rondé.
Okay.
Which feels like it would have been a decent guess.
Brian Kelly led that team in interceptions that year.
I can't guess because
you
I
know
cheated
the answer.
and I looked.
Yeah.
But before I cheated and I looked, I didn't have the right guess on my mind.
The answer is Derrick Brooks.
Look at that.
And this was the beginning of his 2002 NFC Defensive Player of the Year campaign, in which he scored 5 touchdowns. This was the first one, 97-yard touchdown. I can still picture him running because he had kind of an unusual running gait, and you don't usually see your linebackers running 97 yards. It's the second longest interception return in team history after a Shelton Quarles 98-yarder against the Packers, and tied for the 3rd longest touchdown of any type in team history. And he would go on to do great things that year, but they wanted that shutout bad, and Derrick Brooks made it happen.
All right, well, there's our answer. Hope some of you got it right.
I bet some
Unlike
people
me
got
and Bree,
that one.
we got it wrong. That's true. That one feels like a thing maybe people would have known. All right, that is going to do it for us on this edition of Bucs Insider. Thank you so much for being here with us. We'll see you next week.